Hello, welcome to Humanities 140, Critical Thinking in the Modern Age. Today we are covering Chapter 2, Barriers to Critical Thinking. Buckle up, it can be a bumpy ride. So the barriers to critical thinking that we will be covering in this PowerPoint include asking questions that can be awkward, too much fast thinking, stereotyping, the halo effect, belief perseverance, the availability heuristic, answering the wrong question, egocentrism, sociocentrism, wishful thinking, and magical thinking. Asking questions can be awkward, especially when you're asking people about things that they believe in. They may feel attacked or threatened by your questions. So some of the examples could be, why do you believe in God? What evidence do you have that supports your perspective? How can you believe in faith healing? And why do you think vaccines cause autism? So these are those awkward moments where you ask a question that you believe is legitimate, and it could be curiosity, or you could be very negative and derisive. The question really boils down to is not just what you say, but how you say it. So the solution is to, one, know your audience. If you are talking to somebody that you are very good friends with, that has an outstanding intellect and can handle questions, you can pretty much ask them anything and they will not be offended. On the other hand, somebody who is not able to handle intelligent questions or curious questions may feel that you're being sarcastic or snide to them. So you have to be very diplomatic when asking questions, or else you could lose the relationship. So some of the examples to rephrase is, how did you come to embrace your faith in God? And that's a kind of question that's turned in a more positive way. You can also ask somebody, why do you think that? Did you have an experience that led to your belief in faith healing? Or, is there any scientific evidence that supports the connections between autism and vaccines? So what you look for here is a way to ask a question nicely and not sound like a jerk, but also to understand that there are some times that you have to be as clear as possible. Another issue that we deal with is too much fast thinking. Our minds process information constantly. We need to slow down our thinking in order to absorb and evaluate rationally. We need to avoid running off on tangents that are not relevant to the topic. So, this fast thinking is something that most of us experience, whether it's at night when we're trying to go to sleep, or if we're dealing with a problem and we're turning it over in our mind 100 different times. We have to think about why and how what we're trying to do. So here are some solutions. First, we have to learn to listen more effectively. And this is just disciplining ourselves. Don't just wait for a break in their conversation to respond or to reject a point. You have to listen to the entire thing. Second, focus on your breathing deeply and rhythmically, which will enhance the blood flow to your brain, which makes your brain work more effectively. Number 3, focus on the topic being discussed. Secondary or irrelevant points only cause a fog of confusion. So, for example, if you were talking about for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, and someone says, well, Oprah said it's okay to smack a man. Well, that's absolutely not relevant, and it has nothing to do with the conversation. But people, when they start to lose an argument, they start throwing everything they can into the conversation to draw it off track. And that's where you have to be able to say, that's irrelevant. Number 4, if you have a hard time focusing, try a technique called stimming. It's basically self-stimulation, and they use this a lot with people who have ADHD and who may also have autism. And this is the repetition of physical movements, such as playing with a pen or a rubber band while you listen to someone. It gets that nervous energy out so you can focus. And then lastly, you have to look at your response through the prism of whether it is logical and reasonable. And if it's logical and reasonable, then you're okay. As we've talked about in this class before, we have a tendency to stereotype, which is really a function of fast thinking. These generalizations are dehumanizing and do not provide individual respect. So, what we have to do here is not just see a Muslim, see a Hispanic, see an African American, see a Mexican. We have to see the person behind the stereotype. And that's going to help you not only be more open to other people, but it's going to help you be a better thinker because, these people have such an interesting experience because it's not yours. And anything that's different is going to be more interesting. Then we get to something called the halo effect, which is where we use one characteristic, such as attractiveness or likability, to determine specific personality traits, such as being outgoing or kind. Simply put, one characteristic affects our perception when considering additional traits. Multiple studies show that people are more likely to associate positive traits to an attractive person. So if you're beautiful on the outside, you must be beautiful on the inside. And you can see this in movies all the time. The villains are ugly or deformed, and the hero is gorgeous. So this is James Bond, Sean Connery, back in the 60s. And this, I believe, was Dr. No or Dr. Blofeld. I can never remember. But check out that scar. More examples of the halo effect. Here we have Ursula from The Little Mermaid. She is obese. She is in black with purple skin. She has white hair, big mouth, almost looking like the Joker from back in the day. And then the hero, who is Ariel. She's very pretty. She's got a thin waist, small feet once she traded them in for the mermaid stuff. And again, what we see here is a light color, this teal, very pretty. So you can just look and see, we know this is the hero and this is the villain. Here we have a movie from the 60s called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This is a very young Clint Eastwood, looking very handsome. He is the good, and this guy up here is the bad or the ugly, depending on how you look at it. And again, what we see here is this is a shortcut for movie makers to let us know who to trust and who not to trust. More recently, we had Thor with his giant hammer going up against his stepbrother, Loki, who has the greasy hair, and he's very pale looking, he's not handsome, whereas Thor is about as handsome as you can get and still be wearing a cape. Then we have something called belief perseverance. This is the tendency for personal beliefs to stick despite evidence to the contrary. Theories and facts contradicting existing beliefs are conveniently misinterpreted or treated as insignificant. So, a few years ago, circa 2011 or so, a preacher predicted the world would end. And in preparation for the trip, his followers quit their jobs, discarded valuable possessions. But when the world didn't actually end, the preacher came out and said he had just made an error calculating the date. And then the world didn't end when he recalculated the date. So he had to recalculate it again. Now, at some point, most of his believers kind of were, yeah, no, the world's not ending. We need to go back to work and figure out our lives. But there are still people who truly believe this man and gave up everything they owned to wait for the end of the world. This loyalty to our beliefs can lead to something called confirmation bias. We tend to only see that evidence that confirms what we already believe. So if we think that Obama is a Muslim, we're only going to look at things that we would associate with being a Muslim. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the fact of the matter is that he's pro-gay rights. He is someone who goes to a Christian church, he drinks, he has no beard, and you can go through the many lists, and there's no reason to believe this guy would be a Muslim. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's what people look for, are these little things. Oh, he talked to somebody who was an imam from a Muslim center. Well, that doesn't mean anything. Now, the way to overcome belief perseverance is that we must be willing to seek out both sides of an issue and potentially change our mind if evidence sways our opinion. Examine the choices you have made in your life. Have your beliefs held you back from making changes or choices that would have improved your life? Identify the beliefs you have that run contrary to most of society. Ask yourself why you believe these things. The ability to look at your own opinions and ask yourself why you believe something is called metacognition. And this is a very important term because as you get older, your ability to recognize metacognition becomes sharpened and you're better able to understand why you believe certain things. Also, do the research and recognize the ideas that are considered facts. Ask yourself why you don't accept this data as facts. And again, what you're looking at here is the opportunity to look at facts on both sides of a situation and make an informed decision. And that's when you have achieved critical thinking, is making decisions that are informed by facts. Then we have the availability heuristic, which is when we rely on information that we already possess instead of doing the research to make a better decision. And heuristic is defined as enabling a person to discover or learn something for themselves. So if you look at the tweet on the lower left-hand side of the screen, Michelle says, "My grandfather smoked from the age of 13 and didn't die until he was 90. Smoking doesn't kill." Well, unless you look at the science, the statistics, the information, sure, you can keep thinking of that. But if you know any of the facts, you know that Michelle is an idiot. The other thing that we have is something called the recency effect, which is the information that is most recently seen becomes the basis for our thinking. So on the right-hand side, we see a guy shoveling snow, and he's saying, "So much for this global warming," because he has so much snow to shovel. But then, in the summer, when it's incredibly hot, he's saying, "It's bonkers how scientists move the sun closer so they could keep their funding." And again, this idea that global warming is false and that it's a way for scientists to stay employed is just silly. Another thing we see a lot is answering the wrong question. It can be unintentional or intentional, especially if it is a sensitive subject. This process can change the discussion. So, for example, if you were asked to name your favorite singer, you may begin by talking about your favorite song or a specific memory related to a song. But that doesn't answer the actual question. You can take it to that next level with looking at things like politics. So if somebody says, "Who are you going to vote for president?" you may start explaining that you don't trust Hillary Clinton, but you don't think Bernie Sanders can win. So ultimately, you're looking at maybe Martin O'Malley, but you're still not answering the question. You're just giving your parameters on how you're making a decision. So you could always just say, "I don't know yet," and be done with the question. But so many of us like to fill the silence with words because we believe that's going to help us figure out the answer. Something that we have in fact discussed before is egocentrism. And this is the tendency to believe that our perspectives and our experiences are more important than the perspective or experiences of others. My life is more important than your life. You don't know me. You don't know my struggles. We've all heard people say this, and it's like, well, most of us have pretty much the same struggles in life. This often inhibits understanding because one person assumes that everyone has a particular skill set. So, we can pretty much assume most of the time that adults in the United States can read and write. However, you go to a place like North Dakota where there's a lot of American Indians who were never given the opportunity to attend school, and that assumption is going to get you in trouble. So this egocentrism is about perceiving the world through your own filter and no one else's filter. Sociocentrism, again we've discussed briefly, is the tendency to assume the superiority or the rightness of one's own social group or culture. So for example, Christianity is the one true religion, unless you're a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist or someone who's Jewish or somebody who is an atheist, agnostic. There's just so many different religious groups that can be perceived as the one true way of thinking. From a very young age, people tend to accept the beliefs of family, school, religion, peers, government, clubs, organizations, or any group in which they become members. So, for example, if you are part of a theater club at school, you might think that the people in your theater club are the best singers and actors and dancers you've ever seen until you go see a professional organization on Broadway do this. During one's teen years, we often question these beliefs. However, as we get older, most of us end up embracing those same beliefs. And here at the bottom are 3 different memes, so to speak, with proclamations that either Italy, Ireland, or Canada is the best country in the world, when we all know the real best country in the world is the United States, right? Question mark? Yeah, no. It all depends on your perspective, and that's really what you have to remember. It's all perspective. Then we have wishful thinking, is when we wish something to be true and we believe it to be true. So advertisers and marketers are perfect examples of this. We see a product advertised and it's going to make us skinnier, happier, healthier, and despite no evidence that it works, we go ahead and we buy the product anyway. And then we convince ourselves that the product works. So for example, airborne pills, which are usually purchased to minimize the risk of getting a cold, they don't actually work. However, it still has $100 million a year in sales. The reality here is that it's some vitamin C, some orange flavoring, maybe a few vitamins, but it doesn't do anything to prevent you from getting a cold. There is no cure for the common cold. But if you believe it works, some people will swear that it works. And it's something called the placebo effect, is if somebody believes something will work, it might work half the time. So a product like Airborne relies on this placebo effect. Finally, we have something called magical thinking. Magical thinking occurs when we feel powerless over a situation, and we believe that certain actions will result in regaining control over a situation. So, for example, your grandmother might go to church and light a candle for you to make sure you do well on your quiz or your exam. The reality is, the only way you'll do well on your quiz or exam is to study. But there's this feeling that somebody's trying to help you. Sports people, athletes do this all the time, especially if they're on a winning streak. You might have a baseball player who wears the same socks for 3, 4, 5 games in a row. You might have a baseball or football player who wears the same underwear for weeks on end because they believe it brings them luck. And the reality is, this is just magical thinking. There's no way that there is magical underwear that will make you a better baseball player. Anyway, that finishes up this week's lecture. If you have any questions, please feel free to email or text me. Have a great day. Thank you very much.